Seoul in Seoul. Episode 5. What she decided. Scene 1. She signed it. The morning came the way August mornings come to Seoul, with humidity first and then light, as though the city couldn't quite bring itself to announce itself and instead simply arrived, warm and inevitable. Pressing through the curtain she hadn't fully closed the night before. Ari had been awake for most of it. Not restless the way she used to be restless in Atlanta, turning over the same argument, the same ending, the same crack in the foundation of a career she had built too fast on ground that wasn't solid. This was a different kind of wakefulness. This was the wakefulness of a woman who has made a decision and is now simply living inside it, turning it over not to change it, but to understand it from every angle. The way you hold something to the light not because you doubt it, but because you want to see all of it clearly before you carry it out into the world. She dressed slowly. Her long, natural dark brown curls she left loose, the way she always wore them when she needed to feel like herself, not managed, not arranged, not curated for anyone's comfort or expectation. The nose ring caught the morning light briefly as she passed the mirror. And the beauty mark beneath her left eye was the last thing she saw before she turned away from her own reflection and picked up the sealed envelope from the desk where she had placed it the night before with the specific deliberateness of a woman who does not want to second-guess herself in the morning. The lobby of Kang Entertainment announced itself the way it was designed to, not loudly, but absolutely. It was the kind of space that had been engineered not merely to impress, but to diminish, to make the body understand on arrival that it had entered a domain where scale and permanence belonged to someone else. The floors were pale polished granite, so clean they reflected the recessed lighting above in long pale ribbons. The walls were dark tempered glass interrupted by brushed steel panels, and everywhere the architecture said the same thing in the same quiet authoritative register. This empire was not made for your comfort. It was made for your compliance. Ari walked through it like she belonged there. She had not arrived at that posture by accident. She had assembled it on the way over, piece by piece, the way you assemble armor, not because you are afraid, but because the occasion calls for something that looks like it isn't. Her chin was level. Her shoulders were down and back, the natural confident ease of a woman who grew up singing on stages and learned early that the body either communicates authority or it doesn't, and that the choice is almost always yours. She moved across the granite in measured steps, and the morning staff behind their stations glanced up and then glanced back down, which was not indifference so much as recognition. The lobby understood her now in a way it hadn't 3 weeks ago. When she had stood at the reception desk with her voice carefully neutral and her hands not quite steady, and the enormous unfamiliarity of everything pressing in from all sides. The assistant at the front reception was young, precise, and moved with the practiced economy of someone whose entire professional existence was organized around the management of other people's time. Ari placed the sealed envelope on the desk and slid it forward with 2 fingers, offering only the necessary identification of what it contained. The assistant received it with both hands, the traditional way, the Korean way, the small formal gesture of a culture that treats the exchange of important things as a ceremony rather than a transaction. For a moment the envelope simply existed between them, and Ari felt the specific weight of the instant before letting go of something you have been holding, the last half second when the thing is still technically yours, still in the radius of your fingers, still a choice rather than a consequence. Then she let it go. She told herself, on the way to the elevator, that she knew exactly what she was doing. She was not surrendering. That word did not belong anywhere near this decision. She was stepping inside the machine on purpose, eyes open, both hands steady, Min-Seo's number on speed dial in the phone in her coat pocket. Ji-Hoon's confession living quietly in her chest alongside the contract and the memory of the window and the city below it and the way Seoul had looked at 3 in the morning when it was simply itself, enormous and glittering and indifferent to her doubt. She was not walking in naively. She was walking in knowingly, which was an entirely different thing, and she needed herself to understand the difference with clarity, because the clarity was what would hold her when the machine tried to make her forget it. The elevator went up. 32 floors. The number was familiar to her now in the way that numbers belonging to significant places become familiar, not just numerical, but weighted, specific, a coordinate that means more than its digits. She felt the ascent in her body the way you feel the altitude change when a plane lifts, the gentle compression, the slight disorientation, the body recalibrating to a new elevation. And then the doors opened and Seoul was there, spread across every window of the 32nd floor in the full extravagant excess of an August morning, vast and glittering and indifferent the way only enormous beautiful things are indifferent. The way the ocean is indifferent, the way the sky is indifferent, the indifference not of cruelty but of scale. But from here, in this moment, standing at the glass with the city in every direction and the envelope already out of her hands and the decision already living in the world without her permission to take it back, from here, it was hers. Not the city. Not the contract. Just the view. Just this particular morning, this particular light on this particular skyline, her own reflection faint in the glass with her curls loose and her chin level and the small gold ring catching the sun. Hers. Scene 2. Ji-Hoon finds out. By late morning, the decision had already begun moving through Kang Entertainment without announcing itself as a disruption. Ji-Hoon found out from an assistant who mentioned it in passing. That was how information moved inside the building, not delivered so much as noted, the way you note weather, the way you observe a temperature change and absorb its implications without ceremony. The assistant was relaying the morning's schedule updates. Standing just inside the doorway to Ji-Hoon's office with a tablet in her hand and her voice carrying the particular neutrality of someone who has learned to deliver every category of news in the same register. Because in this building the weight of things is not hers to assign. She said it between two other items on the morning log. The Washington contract had been received and filed. The artist had signed. Ji-Hoon said nothing. After the assistant left and the door closed behind her with the soft certainty of a well-engineered latch, the office was very quiet. He was standing at his desk rather than sitting at it, had been standing before she arrived, in the middle of something he could no longer recall. And he remained standing now in the specific quality of stillness that overtook him when his mind was doing something his body had not yet been informed of. It was not calm. It looked like calm the way the surface of deep water looks like calm, while below it something vast and cold and entirely in motion does whatever it does in the dark. She signed it. After everything. After the photograph he had shown her and the cafe and the confession he had made in the street outside the studio, the truth he had moved toward her with both hands open because she deserved to have it, after all of that. She had walked into the lobby the next morning and she had signed it. He moved to the window. The silver watch on his left wrist caught the light as his arm came forward, and he registered the weight of it the way he always registered it when he was trying to stay anchored. The specific familiar gravity of a thing he wore not for ornamentation, but for continuity, for the thread back to himself in moments when the self felt like something that required locating. He pressed his palm flat against the glass and felt the city cold on the other side of it, the August heat pressed against the outer surface, while the climate control maintained its precise interior temperature. The two systems working against each other in permanent, invisible tension, and, he thought, not for the first time, not analytically, but somewhere deeper and less articulable, that he understood something about that particular arrangement. His first reaction was not anger. He had expected anger, or perhaps he had expected to expect anger, the clean, simple emotion of a man who believed he had been clear and finds out clarity was insufficient. But what arrived instead was more complicated and harder to hold, a fear. Not the Kang family variety of fear, which was always about exposure, always about the structure of the empire and the cost of its unraveling. This was a different kind entirely. This was the fear of a man who has spent 5 years building walls around himself with great care and deliberate architecture, who has justified the walls as wisdom and self-preservation and the reasonable conclusions of experience, and who has, in recent weeks, despite every intention to the contrary, begun to feel the walls as loss rather than protection. She had made him feel that, not by asking for anything, simply by being what she was in rooms she shared with him. He pressed his forehead briefly to the glass and closed his eyes. The question forming in his chest was not whether she had made a mistake, it was whether he had made one. Whether his reading of her had been wishful rather than accurate. Whether the warmth he had felt moving through him in increments, the slow thaw of something he had kept frozen for a long time, was not the signal of something true, but the symptom of his own need. The need of a man who has been cold so long he mistakes the first unfamiliar warmth for something meaningful rather than simply something present. He knew the difference, theoretically. He had made it a point of discipline to know the difference. But standing at the glass with Seoul spread below him in every direction and the news sitting in the room like an object neither of them could ignore, he found himself doing the thing he had been slowly, carefully, almost imperceptibly allowing himself to do in recent weeks, the thing he had been choosing to do one increment at a time as though testing weight on ice. He found himself choosing, again, to trust something he could not entirely see. The file was with the lawyer. The truth was already moving through the world at whatever speed truth moved, which was never the speed you planned for and always, eventually, faster than you feared. He had done what he came here to do. And she had made her own choice. And perhaps, those two things were not in conflict. Perhaps she had walked into that lobby with the signed contract in her hand and her eyes open in ways he didn't yet have the full architecture of. He didn't know. He pressed the watch face briefly with his thumb, the familiar cool of the silver case against his skin, and he chose, one more time, in the specific faith of a man who is learning it slowly and badly and with great effort, to wait before he decided what it meant. Scene 3. The first real recording session. When she walked into the studio booth later, the decision came with her. Something shifted before she sang a single note, before she even touched the headphones. The sound engineer in the control room had been running sessions in this building for 11 years, had recorded the full range of what a Korean entertainment company asked of its artists, had learned to calibrate his expectations the way you calibrate a piece of equipment, accurately, without sentiment, in the service of the task. He knew within the first 30 seconds of a session what kind of session it was going to be. The artist who was performing. The artist who was managing. The artist who was afraid. He had a vocabulary for all of them. He did not, sitting behind the glass watching Ari Washington settle the headphones over her long loose curls and close her eyes in the center of the booth, have a vocabulary for what was walking in through the studio door this morning. This was different from the careful sessions before. He couldn't have articulated it in technical terms. It wasn't mic placement, wasn't the room treatment, wasn't anything in the chain he could point to and name. It was her. The specific quality of her presence in the booth was different from every previous session, and the difference was this. She was not auditioning. She was not managing an impression. She was not projecting a version of herself across the glass toward an imagined audience and hoping the projection landed correctly. She had stopped doing that, and the stopping of it was immediately, physically, professionally legible to everyone in the room who knew how to read what a voice does when the performer finally gets out of its way. Her natural dark brown curls moved slightly as she turned her head to center herself, and the small nose ring caught the booth light for a moment, and then she went still in the way that singers go still before the real thing happens, not rigid, not braced, but gathered. The way water gathers before it moves. She was standing at the intersection of everything that had brought her here. The Atlanta stage she had walked off in grief 2 years ago. The flight she had taken toward a city she didn't know. The contract in the sealed envelope. the photograph, the cafe. The confession on the street outside the studio where a man had handed her the truth with both hands open and not asked her to do anything specific with it. She was standing in all of it, and the music she was about to make was not in spite of that, it was because of it. The weight of the particular life she had been living was not a problem she was trying to sing her way out of. It was the material. It was what she was bringing into the booth and offering to the microphone the way you offer something real to a real thing, with the specific courage of not flinching at the last second. She sang. The sound of it moved through the glass the way light moves through amber, altered by the medium, slowed, given color and depth and a warmth it wouldn't have had in open air. It hit the control room in layers. First, the technical impression, the frequency range, the placement, the breath support, all flawless, all natural, all the product of years of discipline married to something that could not be taught. Then, almost immediately behind that first layer, the second impression, the one that had nothing to do with technique, the truth of it. The specific, unmistakable quality of a human voice singing something it has not yet found a way to say in words, something that exists below language and above silence, in the precise register of the things that happen to a person and leave a mark. The sound engineer went very still. He had both hands on the console, and then he did not, because somewhere in the first 30 seconds of playback, he had stopped working the session, and had simply started listening to it, which was not something he allowed himself to do during a take, which was a professional rule he had maintained for 11 years without exception. He allowed it now. His hands rested in his lap, and his eyes were on the glass and on the woman on the other side of it, and he did not touch a single fader because the levels were already right and because adjusting anything would have been a disruption of something he did not have the language to describe, but recognized with absolute certainty as the kind of thing that only happens in a recording studio a handful of times in a career, a voice doing something true in a room designed to hold it, and the room holding it perfectly, the booth around her like a held breath, the walls and baffles and the warm acoustic ceiling all conspiring to contain and magnify the thing she was giving, to make it last, to give it a shape the world could eventually carry. Scene 4. Sungwoo celebrates too early. Elsewhere in the building, the same signed contract carried an entirely different meaning. Sungwoo Kang did not celebrate. He had never understood celebration as a category that applied to his own operations. Celebration implied surprise, and Sungwoo was never surprised, because surprise was simply the tax you paid for insufficient preparation. And insufficient preparation was a failure mode he had engineered out of his life by the age of 25 with the same thoroughness and absence of sentimentality with which he had engineered everything else. What he did instead was confirm. He confirmed outcomes the way an architect confirms a completed structure, not with joy, but with the specific cool satisfaction of a man verifying that the engineering held. The contract was on his desk. He had reviewed it twice. It was correct. Every clause he had constructed for this particular situation, every carve-out and exclusivity provision and creative ownership clause he had spent 3 weeks refining, sat in the document exactly where he had placed it. Undisturbed by negotiation, uncontested by her representatives, she had no representatives, which was a detail he had found pleasing in exactly the way a chess player finds a cleared board pleasing. There was a glass of whiskey on the desk to the right of the contract. He did not drink it so much as acknowledge it, the way powerful men acknowledge small luxuries, noting their presence without needing to consume them, as though possession were already enough and consumption merely optional. The Seoul skyline behind him in the last of the afternoon light was a thing he had long since stopped seeing. It had become simply a backdrop, the way the walls of a room you have occupied for years become simply walls, part of the architecture of your existence rather than a view. He did not look at it. He was looking at the contract with the quiet focus of a man reviewing the evidence of his own competence, and the evidence was satisfying. The American singer was secured. Ji-Hoon's sentimental detour, the photographs, the late-night conversations the building staff had noted, whatever misguided impulse toward transparency his half-brother had been indulging had been contained. Artists tested boundaries occasionally. Ji-Hoon tested loyalty occasionally. Both were manageable. Both had, in his assessment, been managed. The situation had resolved itself in the Kang family's favor as situations always did when you controlled enough of the variables, and Sung-woo had spent 20 years ensuring that the number of variables he controlled was never fewer than all of them. He did not know about the file. He did not know that his half-brother had spent the better part of 3 years assembling it, one document at a time, one testimony at a time, in the patient, methodical way of a man who was not acting impulsively but constructing something, waiting for the right moment with the discipline of someone who had been trained by the same family and turned that training in the opposite direction. He did not know that a lawyer in a Gangnam office building had received the file the previous evening and had already begun making calls. He did not know that a young Korean-American woman with a straight black bob and a folder of archived evidence had an appointment at that same office the following morning. What he knew, what he believed with the absolute certainty of a man who has not yet been wrong in any way that cost him anything significant, was this: the artist was signed, the heir was contained, the empire was intact. He was the Kang family's center of gravity, and he always had been. Things moved in relation to him, not the other way around. He reached out and turned the contract face down on the desk, not to hide it but simply because he was finished with it, and finished was how Sung-woo Kang closed every chapter, not with ceremony, but with dismissal. The thing was done. He would move on to the next thing now. His office was extraordinarily still. The quality of the stillness was that particular stillness that exists only in rooms occupied by men who have won everything they have tried to win and cannot yet conceive of the mechanism by which this might change. It was the stillness of the last second of certainty, not the stillness of peace, but the stillness of a world that has not yet begun to move. That is gathering itself somewhere below the threshold of his awareness for a movement he has not planned for because he did not know to plan for it, because the variable that would trigger it was not on any version of his board. The last second. The absolute and specific last second before everything he believed about this situation ceased to be accurate. He did not know it was the last second. That was precisely the point. Min-Seo meets the lawyer. While Sung-woo mistook completion for control, Min-Seo was already moving in the opposite direction. She arrived in her good blazer. It was the navy one, the one she had bought in Itaewon 3 months ago because she wanted something that said she was serious in a context where serious was the only thing that would be heard, and she had been right about that in ways she hadn't yet needed to test. She tested it today. The folder under her arm was not thin. She had been building it quietly for 2 weeks since the evening Ari had sent her the photograph, not frantically, not in the adrenaline of the immediate, but systematically, with the careful, methodical attention of a woman who had learned Korean bureaucracy and Korean media archives and the specific geography of what gets left in publicly accessible records when a company believes it has covered its tracks well enough. They never cover them well enough. There is always a blog post. There is always an archived entertainment news item from 5 years ago that nobody thought to remove because nobody believed it still mattered. There is always a pattern if you are the kind of person who looks for it, and Min-Seo Park had always been exactly that kind of person, even when the bubbly warm exterior suggested otherwise. She settled into the chair across the desk from the lawyer and placed the folder in front of her with both hands and did not apologize for its thickness. The lawyer was a man in his mid-40s with the particular manner of someone whose entire professional reputation rested on the ability to separate what could be demonstrated from what was merely known, a distinction that ran. She had always understood, far deeper in the Korean legal system than people who hadn't navigated it tended to appreciate. He had already received the file Ji-Hoon delivered. He had been sitting with it for less than 24 hours, which was not very long, but 24 hours was sometimes enough time for a file like that one to begin to change the shape of what was possible. She was different in this room. Anyone who had known Min-Seo only in the context of coffee shop tables and late-night ramen and the warm, easy laughter she moved through the world with would not have recognized the woman sitting across from this lawyer now. Not because she had become someone else, but because the bubbly, warm surface she wore comfortably in most rooms was simply not the surface this room required. And Min-Seo Park had always been, beneath every surface, whoever the moment needed. She was sharp here. She was clear and purposeful and willing to let the silence sit when the silence needed to sit, which is the mark of someone who understands that rushing an important conversation is its own kind of error. She walked him through the folder. The Han Soo-yeon timeline, the signing at 22, the 18-month silence clause embedded in a writer that no entertainment lawyer outside the Kang orbit would have approved. The sudden disappearance from every public platform in the same week that a particular executive had been photographed at a Kang family gala. The other names. The pattern of signings and disappearances and silences that, taken individually, could be explained and had been, taken together, could not be. She laid it out without editorializing. The facts were sufficient on their own and she knew it, and she needed him to arrive at the same conclusion through his own professional reasoning rather than through hers. Because conclusions a lawyer reaches independently hold differently than conclusions offered to him ready-made. She had thought about this, too. She had thought about almost everything in the 2 weeks she had been building this folder quietly in the evenings after Ari went to sleep. In the particular focused urgency of someone who is doing this for a friend who doesn't know the full shape of what is being assembled on her behalf. He looked up from the folder. He had been reading for a long time, longer than a preliminary review required, which meant he had not been doing a preliminary review, but something closer to a reckoning. A professional reassessment of the distance between what he had received yesterday and what she had just added to it. The answer he gave her in Korean changed the shape of the room, changed the shape of what was possible, and took the thing she had been building in the evenings and gave it a dimension she had been hoping for but had not allowed herself to count on. She absorbed it. She confirmed the one practical point that mattered most, and he gave her the clarity she needed. She did not allow her face to do anything other than receive the information, because this was not the moment for reaction. Reaction could come later, in the elevator, alone. She thanked him. She stood and buttoned the good blazer. In the elevator going down, she pressed her back against the mirrored wall and let out a long, slow breath that she had been holding, not from fear, but from the specific contained adrenaline of someone who has just watched the thing they spent weeks building become, in the space of a single conversation, real. Her hands were slightly unsteady. She looked at them for a moment in the elevator's mirror-polished walls, her round cheeks reflected back at her, the curtain bangs and the soft brown eyes and the navy blazer and the folder still pressed under her arm, and she allowed herself, in the privacy of the descending car, to feel the full weight of what it meant to be part of something that had just become very, very real, and to feel it not with fear, but with the particular steadiness of a woman who chose this, who walked in knowing. And who would walk out the same way? The rooftop. By dusk, after the signed contract and the lawyer's office and all the quiet machinery beginning to turn beneath the surface of the day, Ji-Hoon found Ari on the rooftop. It was not an accident. He had known she went there. He had seen her there twice before through the glass of the stairwell door, once in the early evening 2 weeks ago, standing at the low railing with her natural dark brown curls loose in the wind, her curvy silhouette against the darkening sky, her phone in her hand and her face turned toward the city in the specific absorption of someone who is not thinking but simply being somewhere, and once a week ago, from below, catching the angle of the rooftop's edge against the fading blue of the sky, and understanding from nothing more than the posture of a figure at the railing that she was there. He had not gone up either time. He had told himself it was respect for her privacy, and this had been partially true. The other part was the part he was less willing to name. Tonight he went anyway. Seoul in August at dusk was its own particular category of beauty, not the clean architectural beauty of the lobbies and the glass towers, not the planned splendor of the Han River at night, but something more organic and less intentional. The specific effect of late-day heat on a city of 12 million people, the way the light went gold over the apartment blocks and transmission towers, and the green of the mountain ridges visible from elevation went gold and then rose, and then, as they stood there, the deep extraordinary blue of an August evening arriving from the east over the Han, moving across the city the way evening moves across a large surface, gradually in gradients. The sky performing its slow color change with the unhurried indifference of something that has done this every day for 10 million years, and will do it again tomorrow regardless of anything happening 32 floors below it. The distance between them when he first stepped onto the rooftop was 6 or 7 feet. It did not close dramatically. It simply changed over the course of the next several minutes as they oriented toward the view and then, eventually, toward each other. In the unhurried, natural way of two people who have been circling each other for weeks and have arrived somewhere they are no longer pretending not to be. His silver watch caught the last of the gold light. Her nose ring did the same. These small reciprocal flashes of reflected light, unnoticed by either of them, were nevertheless the truest summary of where they were, two people catching each other's light at last. They did not turn the rooftop into a discussion of the contract. They did not circle the file, which was with the lawyer, already moving through the world at a velocity neither of them could manage or moderate. Sungwoo's name stayed out of the evening air, where it would have given the dusk the wrong taste. What passed between them instead was small and real, the kind of ordinary biographical truth that becomes more intimate than confession, because it is not arranged to convince anyone of anything. Ari let Atlanta enter the space between them. The humidity of Georgia summers, the remembered warmth of her grandmother's kitchen, the radio station she had listened to as a girl through a single broken earbud while she was supposed to be doing homework. Ji-Hoon received those details with the focused stillness of a man allowing them to alter the map he carried of her. In return, Ji-Hoon allowed the memory of his father to surface without the company mythology attached to it. Not the empire builder, not the patriarch, not the name on the lobby signage, but the actual man in fragments, the specific way he had tied his shoes, a gesture with his hands when he was trying to explain something complicated to a child who was listening with all his attention, the way Ji-Hoon had memorized that gesture and repeated it unconsciously for years before he understood what the repetition was. Ari did not fill the pauses, and the silence gave the memories room to remain themselves. The watch became part of that quiet exchange as well, not through an explanation performed for effect, but through the simple private truth of what it meant to him, visible in the way he touched the case with 2 fingers and let the history of it stand between them without defense. And then the light finished its movement across the city and Seoul went into the full blue of evening all around them, and they were still there, his silver watch and her nose ring, his sharp jawline in the deep blue. Her golden undertone skin in the last warmth of a day that was releasing itself into the dark, and the cold left his face. Not gradually, not in increments. All at once, the way ice releases when the temperature changes past a threshold, a specific unfamiliar ease settling across his features, the lines and angles of a face that was almost always performing something, control, authority, absence, caution. Going quiet. Going simply quiet, like a room after the music stops and before anything else begins. She saw it happen. She did not remark on it, because it was not the kind of thing you remark on. You simply receive it, the way you receive something offered carefully, with both hands, in the space that exists when 2 people have finally, simply, stopped pretending. Han Soo-yeon reaches out. The next movement came quietly, through a message instead of a meeting. It arrived on a Thursday evening. 3 lines. Sent through the lawyer's office, forwarded to Min-Seo, Forwarded to Ari, the relay of it precise and careful, like the passing of something fragile through a series of trusted hands. Each person in the chain understanding the weight of the thing they were carrying and moving it accordingly. By the time it arrived on Ari's phone, it had traveled from Busan, from a woman Ari had never met, but whose name had been living in her chest for weeks like a piece of music she couldn't quite resolve. Han Soo-yeon. The name Ji-Hoon had said in the street outside the studio. The name Min-Seo had said at the cafe table over coffee that had gone cold while the story unfolded. The name at the center of the pattern that the archived articles described without naming directly. The ghost at the heart of Kang Entertainment that the building pretended didn't exist. She read it 3 times. The first time for the information itself, spare, exact, and translated by Min-Seo in brackets beside each line. Its precision was somehow more affecting than length would have been, because a woman who had been silent for 5 years and was choosing to break that silence had a very specific relationship with language. She did not waste it. The message carried 3 essential facts. Han Soo-yeon had seen what was happening. She was in Busan, and she was ready to speak. The second time for what the words meant. Not just their surface meaning, the practical information of location and intention, but what it meant that they existed at all. That Han Soo-yeon, who had been dropped and silenced and disappeared from every platform she had built her voice on, who had spent 5 years in whatever shape a person makes of themselves after that kind of erasure, had watched the information moving through the world and had chosen, in response to it, not to stay silent. That choice had a cost Ari could only partially imagine, and the fact of it, the specific courage of 3 careful lines sent toward the possibility of something being made right, sat in her chest with a weight that was different from anything else she had felt in this whole complicated season. The 3rd time she read it for the weight. For the accumulated gravity of a woman she had never met who had lost everything at 22, not through failure or collapse, but through being deliberate, being excellent. Being exactly what she was told she was not allowed to be when that stopped being useful to the people who had made money from it. A woman who had been made small and silent, and who had sat with that smallness for 5 years and was now writing 3 sentences toward the light. Ari held the phone and felt something move through her that was not triumph. Triumph would have been too clean, too self-referential, too much about her own vindication, and this was not about that. It was something more complicated and more human. It was the knowledge, arriving suddenly and fully formed, that she had always been carrying more than her own voice into Kang Entertainment. That the decision she had made at the window, the complicated, imperfect, eyes-open decision to sign, to step inside the machine on purpose, had already, somehow, in ways she hadn't known to plan for, been about this woman in Busan who she didn't know to think about yet. That the thread was longer than she could see from where she was standing, and it connected things she was only now beginning to understand were connected. She called Min-Seo. Min-Seo answered before the 2nd ring. Of course she did. She had been sitting with her phone face up on the table for the last 40 minutes, since she had forwarded the message, waiting for the moment when Ari had read it enough times to be ready. Her first response was silence, which was the correct response, the open line carrying presence before language, letting Ari know she was not alone inside the weight of what had just arrived. Ari exhaled. Then the 2 of them, in separate Seoul apartments, joined by the brief electronic distance between them in the late evening of a Thursday that had just become the most significant Thursday either of them had experienced in this city, began to make sense of what came next. Sung-woo comes for Ji-Hoon. Once Han Soo-yeon's silence began to loosen, the consequences found their way back to the Kang family. The reckoning was not loud. It was never loud in the Kang family. Loudness was a property of people who did not have control, and the Kang family had always had control, had built its entire self-image on the possession of it, had confused the possession of it with virtue. A confusion Ji-Hoon had spent his adult life trying to name clearly and resist quietly, and was now, finally, resisting in a way that was neither quiet nor deniable. Sung-woo did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He had a contact at the law firm, not the lawyer himself, but someone adjacent to the process, someone whose proximity to the right information could be cultivated the way Sung-woo cultivated all proximities, with patience, with money, with a specific understanding that in a city of 12 million people there was always someone who could be positioned usefully if you were willing to invest in positioning them. He had the contact. He had a file description. And a file description, in the hands of a man like Sung-woo Kang, was enough to tell him everything. Ji-Hoon was standing when Sung-woo arrived. He had been standing, in fact, since the call came through 40 minutes ago from a number he recognized as adjacent to his half-brother's intelligence network, the call that told him what he had been waiting to be told, that the thing he had assembled and delivered was no longer a secret, that the window between action and consequence had closed. He had spent 40 minutes standing at his office window, watching Seoul in the early evening, the silver watch on his wrist, rehearsing nothing. He did not rehearse. He had spent 3 years making this file, and he knew everything that was in it, and he knew exactly where he stood, and he did not need to rehearse. Sung-woo sat. Ji-Hoon stood. The asymmetry was deliberate on Sung-woo's part, the architecture of the room arranged in the way he always arranged rooms, the seated man with the authority, the standing man in the position of the person being addressed. It was a staging choice so embedded in the Kang family's relational vocabulary that neither of them needed to name it. Sung-woo set his phone face down on the desk with the specific economy of a man who is not going to be interrupted by anything external, because what is happening in this room is the only thing that is happening. He was in a dark suit, perfectly fitted. His slicked-back hair caught the desk lamp. His sharp angular cheekbones in the low light gave his face the quality of a carved thing, and his expression was what it always was, cold and precisely calibrated. The face of a man for whom emotion was a variable to be managed in others and suppressed entirely in himself. Sung-woo began his dismantling with the cold, precise language of the Kang family at its most formal, the register reserved for things that mattered enough to require elegance, things that needed to be taken apart carefully so none of the important components were damaged in the process. The subject was the family, what it had built, what it required to maintain, and what the cost of disloyalty looked like when traced honestly to its conclusions. Their father's memory entered the room not with warmth, never with warmth, but as an inherited pressure Sung-woo expected to have the force of an argument. The charge he laid over Ji-Hoon's actions was betrayal, placed quietly into the room like furniture meant to remain there. Ji-Hoon listened to all of it. He stood at the window with his hands at his sides and his silver watch on his left wrist and his face doing very little, which Sung-woo read, as he always had, as deference, as the body language of a younger brother absorbing a correction. He was wrong about what the stillness meant. He had always been wrong about what Ji-Hoon's stillness meant, which was perhaps the central miscalculation of his management of his half-brother over the course of 20 years. He had confused composure for submission, had read the absence of reaction as the absence of conviction. Ji-Hoon had known for a long time that this was how Sung-woo read him. He had used it. For 3 years he had used it, moving quietly inside the building, building the file slowly, assembling the truth one piece at a time, and Sung-woo had looked at the stillness and seen accommodation when he should have been seeing something else entirely. When Sung-woo finished, the room was very quiet. Ji-Hoon turned from the window and looked at his half-brother for a long moment, not simply at the older man's eyes, cold and waiting for familiar capitulation, but at the full shape of the situation that had finally arrived. His refusal entered the room without volume and without spectacle, not as a line delivered for effect, but as a boundary that had already been drawn before either of them stepped into the office. The room absorbed it. Sungwoo's face changed in one small, significant way. Outside the glass, Seoul went on, and the meaning of what had just happened sat in the air between them, irreversible and impossible to take back. Ari records the song. After the confrontation, the song was still waiting for her. It had started as words on a napkin in a Hongdae cafe on a Tuesday 2 weeks after she landed in Seoul, before the contract, before the photograph, before any of the things that had happened since. She had been sitting at a window table with Americano going cold in a paper cup and the street outside doing what Seoul streets do, constant, layered, indifferent to any individual experience unfolding within it. And she had felt something she didn't have a name for yet, a feeling of standing at the edge of something enormous and warm and terrifying all at once, the specific feeling of a city making room for you in ways you hadn't asked for and couldn't explain. A feeling that sat in her, just the way the best kinds of feelings sit, below language, below reason, in the body rather than the mind, insisting on itself with a quiet persistence that meant she needed to write it down or it would find somewhere else to go. She had written it on a napkin because that was what was available. The melody had arrived in pieces over the following days, a phrase at a time, living in her body between studio sessions and late evening walks and the rooftop and everything else the city kept putting in her path. By the time she understood what the song was about, she had already been carrying it for 2 weeks. By the time she understood who it was about, the question of what to do with that understanding had become inseparable from every other question she was already holding. The napkin was long since transcribed. The melody lived in her body now the way long-practiced things live in a body, accessible without effort, the way your fingers know a number you've dialed 1,000 times without the mind needing to retrieve it. She stood in the booth in the specific configuration she now understood as her working posture, curls loose, headphones settled just so, eyes closed, weight on both feet. The small nose ring and the beauty mark and the golden undertones of her brown skin, all part of the same whole, all part of the same instrument standing in a room designed to amplify and preserve what she was about to offer it. The napkin melody. The Hongdae Cafe. The feeling she hadn't had a name for yet and now had too many names for, and none of them quite large enough. The specific quality of singing a song about something that is still unresolved is not something that can be replicated in the studio by technical means. You cannot mix it in. You cannot achieve it through take selection or vocal processing or any form of production wizardry, however sophisticated. It exists in the performance or it doesn't, and it exists in the performance only when the thing the song is about is still live in the body, still happening, still unfinished, still moving through the singer at the moment she opens her mouth. Ari's voice, in this take, had that quality so completely and so obviously that the sound engineer, who had gone very still the last time she was in this booth and had thought he would not be surprised again so quickly, went still again, in a different way this time. A way he didn't have professional language for because what was happening on the other side of the glass was not a technical event he could describe to anyone later with any precision. It was simply true. That was the only word that consistently applied. Her voice was doing the absolutely true thing, the rarest thing, the thing every recording studio in the world was built to try to catch, and that slipped through most of the time anyway. The sound of the absolute edge of a feeling, not the performance of that feeling. Not the recollection or the approximation, but the actual living edge of it, the place where the feeling is still becoming itself and the voice catches it there and holds it. The glass held it. The walls held it. The entire acoustic architecture of the studio, all the foam and diffusion and carefully calibrated reflective surfaces, held the sound the way a cupped hand holds water, with just enough structure to give it shape without constraining it, without diminishing the particular wild, living quality of a thing that belongs, fundamentally, to the air. The booth around her was a held breath. Not the held breath of tension or anticipation, the held breath of awe, the involuntary body response to the presence of something real, The physical reflex of a room in the presence of a voice that has stopped pretending it is less than it is. She sang through to the end of it, and the end of it was not a conclusion so much as an arrival, the song not closing but landing, settling into the last note the way a bird settles, fully and without hurry, because it has reached where it was going. She stood in the silence afterward with her eyes still closed and the headphones still on and the city outside the building and everything still unresolved and the song now in the air, irreversible, real, a thing that had been given to the world and could not be taken back. The photograph goes public. By Friday afternoon, what had begun as a private file, a private message, and a private song was ready to become public. Min-Seo made the decision alone. The good blazer was hanging on the chair behind her from the lawyer's office visit 3 days ago, still not put away because putting it away felt like closing a chapter she was not yet done with. And her laptop was open on the table and the archived photograph was loaded on the screen and the caption was already written in a note document she had been refining, one phrase at a time, for the past 48 hours. The caption was not dramatic. It was not inflammatory. It was factual and specific and sourced, the kind of language that travels farther than rhetoric because it cannot be as easily dismantled, the kind of language Min-Seo had been choosing her entire life without always knowing that was what she was doing. She did not ask Ari. This was not an oversight, it was a deliberate choice, made with full understanding of its implications. Ari would have said yes, and the yes would have cost her something, because Ari was still inside the Kang Entertainment contract, still living in the 32nd floor's ecosystem, and some costs are better carried by someone outside the blast radius. Min-Seo was outside it. She had always been outside it on purpose. She had come to Seoul as Ari's person, had inserted herself into the city for precisely this reason, not to be protected, but to be the one doing the protecting, in the ways that she was capable of. In the ways that required someone who was connected to the story, but not bound by it. She did not tell Ji-Hoon. He had built the file and delivered it and done his part, and the next part was not his to carry. This was Min-Seo's decision, in Min-Seo's apartment, on a Friday afternoon, with the blazer on the chair and the city outside and the certainty in her chest that a thing being right and a thing being safe were not always the same thing, but that this time, finally, they were close enough. She pressed publish. There was one breath before she did it, one long deliberate breath in and out, the kind that is not hesitation but preparation, the body acknowledging the weight of an action before the action is taken. Then her finger moved. The sound of the keystroke was entirely ordinary, the same flat mechanical sound as any other keystroke on any other Friday afternoon, and the absence of ceremony in that sound was the most honest thing about it. Some of the most significant things that happen in the world sound exactly like nothing. The photograph moved. Not immediately. Nothing moves immediately in the particular way you imagine when you are sitting in an apartment imagining what comes next. It moved the way certain things move through the internet, gathering first in small eddies, the algorithm finding the early signals of traction and beginning to amplify them. Sharing happening in clusters at first, and then in streams, and then in the larger flows that are the difference between a post and an event. The photograph had what the things that travel have, a quality of truth that the audience recognized not through analysis, but through the body, the immediate visceral recognition of something real in a landscape of curated fictions. Han Seon's face was in it, 5 years younger, 22, in a Kang Entertainment hallway, and the caption told the story of what had happened after this photograph was taken with the spare, sourced, unembellished precision of someone who had been building that story for weeks and knew exactly how to carry it into the world. Ari saw it on her phone at 7:14 in the evening, sitting on the floor of her apartment with her curls loose and her headphones around her neck and the residue of the studio session still warm in her body. She read the caption 3 times, and then sat very still with her golden undertone brown skin flushed with something that was not quite any one emotion, but all of them simultaneously. The specific compound feeling of watching a friend do something brave on your behalf and on behalf of someone else, and not asking for anything in return except that it mattered. It mattered. She knew, sitting on that floor, that it mattered in ways that would continue to matter in ways she could not yet fully see. Ji-Hoon saw it on his phone at 7:16, in his car, in traffic on Tehran Aro, the city moving slowly around him in its Friday evening density. He read the caption once and understood it entirely, understood Min-Seo's work in it, understood the precision of the sourcing and the deliberateness of the timing, and understood, in a way that settled into him slowly, and then all at once, that the 3 years he had spent building the file and the years Ari had spent building toward the city and the weeks Min-Seo had spent building this folder had all been moving, without coordination and without a map, toward the same place. He pressed his thumb to the watch face. He looked out at the city. His face was still. His face was, for the first time in a very long time, a still that did not require effort. Sungwoo saw it on the 32nd floor in his office with the dark tempered glass and the Seoul skyline and the whiskey he had not drunk and the face of a man who has never, in 20 years of building and controlling and managing and engineering, been in a room he did not make. The notification arrived on his desk device, and he looked at it for 1 second, and then he understood what he was looking at with the horrible clarity of a man whose intelligence is the precise instrument of his undoing. Because it told him everything immediately, without mercy, without ambiguity. The photograph, the caption, the speed of its movement, the sourcing, the name Han Soo-yeon in the public record after 5 years of careful and expensive silence. He had not engineered this room. He had not placed any of the furniture in it. He had not written any of the variables. The door was open. The photograph was moving through the world at the speed that true things move, which is always, always faster than you planned for. And somewhere in the city below him, in a car on Tehran Aro and on a floor in an apartment and in a Gangnam law office, where a phone was already beginning to ring, the people who had opened it were not afraid, and the door could not be closed. End of episode 5. Some doors, once opened, are not doors anymore. They're simply the way things are now. And Seoul, which has seen everything, shines on any way beautiful and indifferent and full of the particular grace of a city that knows how to hold a story while it finds its ending. Seoul in Seoul is an original work of fiction. All characters, events, and institutions depicted are entirely invented. Episode 6, What He Carries, follows.